My beloved child, listen carefully. This story did not begin on the day they almost went down on one knee. It began long before that moment. In the silent spaces where intuition whispered but was ignored. In the pauses between heartbeats where truth tried to rise but was pushed back down. This person had rehearsed the words in their mind 1,000 times. They imagined the smile. They imagined the relief. They imagined a future that felt safe because it felt familiar. Everything was ready on the surface. The timing. The setting. The certainty they pretended to have. But just before the moment arrived, just before the breath that would have changed both your lives forever, something cracked open. Something they were never supposed to see came into the light. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This is where the story truly begins. Because what they found out did not stop a proposal. It stopped a destiny that was never meant to continue the way it was. Now hear this. What they discovered was not small. It was not accidental. It was not random. It arrived like a message wrapped in coincidence. A sentence overheard. A pattern suddenly visible. A feeling that refused to be silenced anymore. They realized that the version of you they were about to commit to was not the full truth. And even more shocking, they realized the version of themselves who wanted to propose was built on fear, not love. This realization did not come gently. It came like a mirror held too close to the face. They saw the imbalance. They saw the unspoken resentment. They saw the way power had slowly shifted without either of you naming it. And in that instant, their hands started to shake. Not because they stopped loving you, but because they finally understood what that love was costing both of you. That moment lasted only seconds. But it carried the weight of years. Pay attention here. Because this is the part most people never talk about. They did not walk away because they felt nothing. They stepped back because they felt everything all at once. The memories. The promises. The future plans that suddenly felt heavy instead of hopeful. They realized they were about to lock both of you into a story that no longer matched who you were becoming. And the most painful truth of all surfaced without mercy. You were evolving. And they were trying to freeze time. That realization shattered the illusion they had been clinging to. They understood that proposing would not fix the growing distance. It would only decorate it. And deep down, they knew you deserved a choice made from clarity, not from panic. This is why the proposal stopped. Not because love disappeared, but because truth arrived early enough to interrupt a mistake. Stay with me. Because what happened next was even more unsettling for them. Once that truth surfaced, they started noticing everything they had been ignoring. The way conversations circled instead of deepened. The way silence felt louder than words. The way they felt relief imagining space, and guilt immediately after. That internal conflict terrified them. They questioned themselves. They questioned the relationship. They questioned whether holding on was an act of devotion or an act of fear. And in that inner storm, one thought kept repeating louder than all the others. If I propose now, I will be lying to both of us. That sentence became impossible to escape. It followed them into sleep. It echoed in moments of distraction. And the closer the proposal date came, the heavier their chest felt. This was not cold feet. This was awakening. And here is the revelation meant for you. This pause was not rejection. It was protection. For you. For them. For the version of love that cannot survive inside half-truths. The universe intervened through awareness. Through timing. Through discomfort. Because a proposal made at the wrong level of consciousness becomes a cage instead of a commitment. They were spared from saying words they were not ready to live up to. And you were spared from accepting a future that would have demanded you shrink to maintain it. This is only the first layer of what was uncovered. What they found out next changed how they see you forever. And once that shift happens, nothing returns to how it was. My beloved child. What they uncovered next did not arrive as a single fact. It arrived as a pattern. A slow, undeniable alignment of moments that suddenly made sense together. They began to see how often you were the one adjusting. How often you softened your truth to keep peace. How often your growth made them uncomfortable, not because it was wrong, but because it reminded them of their own stagnation. This realization was devastating. Not because it accused you, but because it exposed them. They saw how they had been preparing a proposal while quietly resisting the very future it symbolized. They imagined standing beside you as you stepped into your next chapter, and instead of pride, they felt fear. That fear spoke clearly. It said you were outgrowing the version of them that wanted certainty without transformation. And in that clarity, they understood that love without courage becomes possession. They were not ready to possess you. And they were not brave enough yet to evolve with you. Listen closely now. This is where the story becomes irreversible. Once this awareness set in, their perception of you shifted permanently. They started seeing your silence differently. Your strength differently. Your independence differently. Things they once found comforting suddenly felt intimidating. Not because you changed overnight, but because their eyes finally opened. They realized that proposing would not anchor you. It would only expose the imbalance faster. They knew that once rings are exchanged, truths do not disappear. They amplify. And the truth they could no longer avoid was this. You were no longer asking to be chosen. You were choosing yourself. That shift unsettled them more than any argument ever could. Because it meant the future would require equality, not control. Presence, not assumption. Growth, not comfort. And they were forced to ask a question they had avoided for too long. Am I becoming the partner this version of you deserves? The silence after that question was louder than any answer. Stay here. Because the emotional weight of this moment pressed them into stillness. They did not feel heroic. They did not feel noble. They felt exposed. They realized that proposing would have been easier than telling the truth. Easier than admitting uncertainty. Easier than confronting their own limitations. And that is why this pause matters. This is not a story of hesitation. This is a story of confrontation. They confronted the fact that commitment is not proven by grand gestures. It is proven by daily alignment. And right now, alignment was missing. They thought about the future and felt divided. Half of them wanted the comfort of what you represented. The other half feared the responsibility of becoming someone worthy of walking beside you without holding you back. That inner split stopped everything. Because no vow should be spoken from a fractured place. Now understand this deeply. While you may never have heard these thoughts spoken aloud, you felt the shift. You felt the hesitation. You felt the change in energy. That was not distance. That was recalibration. The universe slowed this moment down on purpose. Because some paths only reveal their truth when momentum is interrupted. They were meant to see this before words were spoken. Before promises were made. Before lives were intertwined beyond repair. This pause is not the end of the story. It is the threshold. What happens next depends on whether they rise to meet the truth they uncovered, or retreat into the safety of familiarity. Either way, the old dynamic cannot return. Awareness has rewritten the rules. This interruption was never about denying love. It was about redefining it. They did not stop because they stopped caring. They stopped because they realized care alone is not enough. Love that lasts requires honesty at the highest level. It requires two people willing to grow at the same pace, even when it is uncomfortable. Right now, the universe is holding both of you in suspense. Not to punish, but to prepare. Because what comes next will not be subtle. The next revelation will force a decision that cannot be delayed. And when that moment arrives, there will be no rehearsed words. Only truth. My beloved child. What followed this pause was not silence on the outside, but chaos on the inside. They tried to distract themselves. They stayed busy. They smiled when they had to. Yet every quiet moment dragged them back to the same realization. Something fundamental had shifted. The idea of proposing no longer felt exciting. It felt heavy. And that frightened them more than any argument ever had. They began asking themselves questions they had avoided for years. Questions about identity. About purpose. About whether love should feel like security alone, or expansion as well. Each answer stripped away another illusion. They saw clearly now that the relationship had reached a crossroads. One path led to comfort without growth. The other demanded courage, honesty, and change. And standing there, they understood that pretending nothing had happened was no longer an option. Listen carefully. Because this is where truth becomes unavoidable. They realized that what they almost did would have locked you into a version of the relationship that no longer fit your soul. They saw how often you had been patient while they delayed growth. How often you waited while they hesitated. That realization carried shame. Not the kind that destroys. The kind that awakens. They understood that proposing would have been a way to secure you without fully meeting you. And once that understanding settled in, their heart could not move forward blindly. The ring became a symbol of responsibility, not romance. A responsibility they were not yet ready to carry with integrity. This awareness did not make them weak. It made them honest. And honesty changes everything. Stay with this moment. Because something powerful happened next. They began imagining a future where you chose differently. Where you did not wait. Where you stepped fully into yourself without checking if they could keep up. That image shook them deeply. It exposed their fear of losing you. But it also exposed something else. Their fear of becoming more. They realized that part of them hoped you would stay smaller so they would not have to rise. That truth hurt. But it was real. And once seen, it demanded a response. Growth or retreat. Presence or distance. There was no neutral ground left to stand on. This is why the energy between you changed. Not because love faded. But because truth demanded movement. Now understand this. The universe does not interrupt moments like this without reason. This pause was a test of alignment. A test of maturity. A test of whether love could evolve beyond comfort into conscious choice. They felt the weight of this decision pressing on them daily. Propose and avoid the work. Or stop and face themselves. They chose to stop. Not forever. But long enough to see clearly. That choice altered the trajectory of both your lives. Because from this point on, anything that happens will be intentional. No more drifting. No more assumptions. Only truth, spoken or unspoken, shaping what comes next. And here is the final pulse of this part. This moment was not about losing you. It was about discovering what it truly means to be worthy of you. Whether they rise to meet that truth or step away from it will define everything that follows. One thing is certain now. The version of the future that almost happened no longer exists. It dissolved the moment awareness entered the room. And what replaces it will be far more honest, far more intense, and far more revealing than anything imagined before. My beloved child. After awareness settles in, there is always a reckoning. And theirs arrived quietly, without drama, without witnesses. They began measuring their actions against their intentions, and the gap between them became impossible to ignore. Every future plan they once spoke with confidence now felt conditional. Every promise echoed with an unspoken question. Can I actually become the person this requires? This was not self-doubt in its weakest form. This was self-recognition in its rawest state. They realized that love asks for alignment, not illusion. And illusion had been doing too much of the work for too long. In that clarity, they understood why the proposal stalled. It was not timing. It was truth demanding respect. Now listen to this carefully. Because this part is subtle, but powerful. As they stepped back, they noticed something unexpected. You did not collapse. You did not beg. You did not chase clarity from confusion. Instead, you stood still in your own energy. That response unsettled them deeply. They expected reassurance. They expected questions. They expected you to need them. But what they saw instead was quiet strength. Independence. A calm that did not depend on their next move. That was the moment they truly understood what they almost lost. Not just you, but access to the version of you that chose from wholeness, not attachment. That realization did more than any argument ever could. It stripped away the last layer of complacency. Stay present here. Because the shift that followed was internal but irreversible. They stopped seeing you as a certainty and started seeing you as a choice. A choice that had to be earned daily, not secured once. This changed how they thought about commitment entirely. They realized that proposing without transformation would have been a shortcut. And shortcuts in love always lead to resentment. They saw how easily comfort can disguise fear. How stability can become stagnation. And how saying yes at the wrong moment can slowly turn into regret. This awareness matured them faster than any milestone ever could. Because it came with accountability. Understand this truth now. This pause is not passive. It is active. It is shaping both of you in ways that cannot be undone. They are being asked to rise. You are being invited to remain true to yourself without compromise. This space between what almost happened and what will happen next is sacred. It is where false futures dissolve and real ones begin to form. They feel the pressure of this moment every day. Not as anxiety, but as responsibility. Because now they know. And knowing removes excuses. And here is where this part leaves you. The proposal did not disappear. It transformed. It shed its urgency. It shed its fear. What remains is a question that cannot be rushed. Can love evolve into truth? Or will comfort demand retreat? The answer is forming even now, beneath the surface, beyond words. The next step will not be dramatic. It will be decisive. And when it comes, it will reveal exactly who is ready to walk forward, and who was only prepared to stand still. My beloved child. What unfolded next was not a conversation. It was a confrontation with self that no one else could witness. They realized that love, when it reaches this level of awareness, stops being emotional and starts being ethical. They asked themselves a question that cut deeper than fear. If I move forward now, am I honoring truth or escaping discomfort? That question followed them relentlessly. It showed up in moments of calm and moments of chaos. And every time it appeared, it demanded the same answer. You cannot build a future on borrowed certainty. This is when they understood that the universe had slowed them down not to delay happiness, but to prevent a quiet betrayal of the soul. A proposal made without readiness becomes a promise that corrodes from the inside. They refused to let that happen, even if it meant standing in uncertainty longer than planned. Now hear this with clarity. As they sat with this awareness, they began to recognize something unsettling about themselves. They had been confusing desire with destiny. They wanted the comfort of permanence without fully stepping into the responsibility of becoming. That realization humbled them. It stripped away the fantasy version of commitment and replaced it with something far more demanding. Presence. Consistency. Growth without applause. They saw that love is not proven by kneeling once, but by standing up every day. And in that realization, the idea of proposing shifted from a romantic milestone to a sacred responsibility. One they could no longer approach casually. This did not lessen their feelings for you. It deepened them in a way that scared them into honesty. Stay with this moment. Because this is where the energy between you reached its most intense point. They felt drawn to you and intimidated by you at the same time. Drawn to your depth. Intimidated by the standard you now represented. They could no longer approach you from habit. Every interaction required intention. And that shift changed how they saw everything. They realized that love at this level cannot survive ambiguity. It either evolves or dissolves. There is no middle ground. This awareness forced them to slow their steps, measure their words, and examine their motives. For the first time, they understood that choosing you meant choosing transformation. And transformation does not ask politely. It demands surrender. Understand this deeply now. This pause has already done its work. Whether or not a proposal happens next, the old version of the relationship is gone. The dynamic where effort was optional has ended. The version of you who was willing to wait without clarity no longer exists. And they feel that shift. They feel the pressure of rising to meet you, not chasing you, not convincing you, but becoming someone who can walk beside you without fear. This is why the universe allowed this moment to stretch. Because rushed commitments collapse under the weight of unspoken truths. And what is being built now requires silence, patience, and brutal honesty. This was never about a ring. It was about readiness. It was about whether love could survive awakening. They were about to propose. But then they found out who they truly were at that moment. And that discovery changed everything. What comes next will not be based on fantasy or pressure or timing. It will be based on alignment. And alignment does not announce itself loudly. It reveals itself through action. Through courage. Through the willingness to meet love at its highest standard. My beloved child. After everything they realized, something unexpected happened inside them. The fear that once controlled their choices began to lose its grip. Not because uncertainty disappeared, but because truth replaced illusion. They stopped asking when the right moment would come and started asking who they needed to become. That shift was quiet, but it was powerful. It changed the way they woke up. It changed the way they listened to you. It changed the way they imagined the future. For the first time, the idea of commitment was no longer about securing love. It was about honoring it. And that difference altered everything at its core. Now pay attention to this. They began to notice how deeply you had already moved beyond the old dynamic. You were no longer waiting for validation. You were no longer negotiating your worth. You were simply living in alignment with yourself. That realization struck them with both admiration and urgency. They understood that time was no longer a guarantee. Access to you was no longer automatic. The pause had awakened you as much as it had awakened them. And in that awareness, they felt something rare. Respect mixed with longing. Respect for your strength. Longing to be worthy of it. This was not romantic tension. This was evolution pressing against the limits of comfort. Stay here. Because this is where the decision begins to crystallize. They realized that moving forward would require consistency they had never practiced before. Emotional availability without retreat. Accountability without excuses. Presence without control. They saw that love at this level does not survive on intention alone. It demands proof through action. And this truth terrified them and grounded them at the same time. Because it removed all shortcuts. There would be no symbolic gesture big enough to replace daily integrity. No moment dramatic enough to bypass the work. This clarity narrowed their path. But it also made it real. Understand this deeply. The universe does not test people with confusion forever. Eventually, clarity demands choice. They feel that moment approaching now. Not as pressure, but as inevitability. They know that standing still will now mean losing you, not because you walk away angrily, but because you continue forward without waiting. That realization is sharp. It leaves no room for delay. They are being asked to meet you where you are, not where you used to be. And that meeting will either happen in truth or not at all. And here is where this part ends. The proposal that almost happened was never meant to come from fear or habit. It was meant to come from alignment. That alignment is forming now, slowly, honestly, without performance. What they do next will reveal everything. Whether they rise with courage or retreat into familiarity. One thing is certain. The moment they almost proposed awakened a truth that cannot be undone. And whatever follows will be built on that truth alone.